The End of the World. Why do we find it so compelling? Hi, welcome back to my channel. Here we talk about all things book. I do wrap ups of what I'm reading, reviews of specific books. I talk about my writing sometimes when there's things to update you on, and I talk about some general topics to do with reading and writing. And this video is kind of one of those. Today, I want to talk about why we're so drawn to dystopias and post-apocalyptic narratives. And this goes for books, but it also goes for TV, movies, and games as well. Just any stories about this topic. Even doom scrolling on TikTok, TikToks about what's going to happen if the nuclear apocalypse happens and what happens if aliens landed. We all find this very compelling and an interesting thing to think about. And I'm just going to dive into why. And I've not read any scientific studies or anything like that to back this up. This is just kind of my opinion, but I do think I understand this quite well. And I'm quite interested in this because I'm writing a dystopian novel. And I think it's important to understand kind of your readers and what they want out of your kind of story. So let's just get into it. Let's talk about the psychology behind why we like these kind of stories. And it's not just because they're exciting, which they are. They are exciting, but I think there's something deeper going on with why we like it. I think that in this day and age, we, especially in the West, where we aren't battling with famine and disease and these kind of issues, we've kind of solved a lot of these big fundamental survival issues, and we're privileged in that we don't have to deal with that. What we have to deal with instead is usually quite a pleasant life. We probably have a safe place to live. We might have our own house that we have a mortgage for 25 or 30 years, which is quite long term. We might have a lovely relationship. We might be comfortable with our family and our friends and a romantic relationship. We might have a job that we like, but that nevertheless has its own stresses, and we might anticipate staying in that job until we retire, which, if you're my age, could be 30 years away. And even if all those things are good and you're quite satisfied with all of those things, the mental idea that that's your life for the next 30 years is quite jarring. I think people find it hard to conceptualize that. And I think we feel this kind of call of the void of what if I just quit my job? What if everything just blew up and I've started from nothing? I think we're kind of attracted to these kind of extremes, but we know we're satisfied with our house. We know we're satisfied with our job and relationship. So we're not going to necessarily do that. And that would probably be a bad choice. But if an apocalypse happened, if World War III broke out, or a pandemic, or a climate event, or zombie apocalypse, it almost takes the power out of your hands, and it almost gives you this sense of disruption and spices things up for you in a way that's not your fault. And I think that's part of why it's so alluring in a way. I think we sort of felt this, those of us that weren't, you know, having a really hard time in the pandemic. There was a little bit of time where we were going, "Oh, is this it? Is this the end of the world?" It really disrupted our routine. And I see a lot of content about people being nostalgic for the pandemic, being at home, the sense of we don't know what's going on and this is all new. For those of us that didn't have loved ones suffering from COVID and such, for those of us that weren't deeply affected but just disrupted a little bit, I think these psychological mechanisms were kind of at play. However, it did get old and it did affect a lot of us negatively, having that disruption, as would any other kind of crisis or apocalypse. I don't think any of us actually want an apocalypse. I think we just find the idea alluring, find the idea of mixing things up and disruption alluring, but we're a bit like a dog chasing a car. We wouldn't know what to do if we actually caught it. If World War III does break out, we will probably all be dead or miserable, and then it will cease to be a fun thought experiment and will become a horrific reality. But nevertheless, I think that call of the void in a mundane life is kind of there, and I think we kind of feed that hunger for that via consuming post apocalyptic stories and narratives. I also think we like to think about the what ifs. We like to think, what would we do if this happened? What's my plan? Am I going to the grocery store? Am I going to loot it? Am I going to kind of hole up in there? That's everyone's idea, by the way, so it's not a good idea. Will I go out to the wilderness? What am I going to do if the grid goes down? This is kind of the psychology behind preppers. People who really think through these scenarios and prep for it. I think that makes sense in America where you have more tornadoes and things like that. In the UK, we don't have a lot of crises like that with the weather, besides maybe some heavy rain. So there's not much need for us to prep. But nevertheless, I do like the idea of prepping. And I think the act of prepping, it kind of feels like you're preparing for something catastrophic, but like exciting. I don't know. I think we all hope that something like that doesn't happen, but by thinking about it and preparing for it, it kind of adds a bit of drama and spice to our lives that otherwise would be maybe a bit more boring. So I think that's a big part of it as well. I think there's the probably very mistaken idea that also we could be the hero. I don't think many of us, unless you work in like healthcare or police service or something like that, I don't think many of us have the opportunity to be a hero in our daily lives or to do things that are heroic. These things come up sometimes, but rarely. However, in a war or a post apocalypse or in a dystopian society, we do have more opportunities to be a hero. I think people are attracted to that idea, and I think wrongly, most people think that they would rise to the occasion and would be the hero, even though there's a lot of data to the kind of opposite, that we would probably not be the hero. We might even commit evil acts under those kind of conditions. And whether we would or wouldn't, we actually don't know that until we're put to the test, until something happens. And I think there's something in people that wants to see, who am I? Who am I really under pressure? Am I the hero of this story, or am I a villain, or am I just normal? Or am I like dead in the first 5 minutes because I'm useless and I can't survive in this kind of scenario? I think lots of people are humble enough to say, yeah, I would probably not cope well if that happened. But there's a good portion of us that is like, no, I could do this, I could do that, blah, 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 blah. And I could rise to the occasion. And that's kind of an ego boost. And it's probably quite healthy self esteem. And I think it's natural for people to want to be tested sometimes. I think that's why people do marathons and Tough Mudder and like Three Peaks challenges and things like that, because they crave that test. And that's the only way they can get it. And that's kind of a nice, safe way to get it. That's the best of both worlds. I also think, like, in an extreme situation like World War III, a post apocalypse, a dystopian society, all of these stories, especially like the post apocalyptic ones, they have elements of like found family, of building connections with the people immediately around you, of creating community, surviving together, maybe falling in love. And those relationships, they're kind of built on mutual trauma and a mutual need to survive. But I think that builds so much more romance and like intimacy. It builds like a meaningful connection. And I think a lot of us kind of miss that. Like in a normal, average life, you might have community, you might have your family and friends and the people at your office. I think when things in life are going smooth and there's not a lot of challenges, people do take each other for granted a bit more. Maybe we're a bit more individualistic, a bit more distant from each other. We just kind of coexist. There's maybe less connection with other people. And I think there's something about a crisis that really brings people together in a different kind of way. And I think we're so isolated in a way in today's society that I think people crave that, and they see that in these kind of post apocalyptic stories and connect to that and kind of yearn for that in a way, which is sad but also kind of true. Like whenever you go through a crisis in your life that's like a family member getting sick or having to like organize a funeral or something like that, these are big like life emotional challenges. I do think they kind of bring the like surviving family together. Like people really step up and take care of the person that's sick, and they step up and they help, plan funerals and things like that. And it has this effect of bringing people together and making people appreciate each other. in a way that we don't do when everything's just good and easy. And I think an apocalypse would be kind of like that. Like, we would suddenly really appreciate each other a lot more because we're going through trauma and extremes. And maybe this just speaks to the fact that people want to connect more and have more found family and more community, especially because people move away from their families and they find themselves quite isolated. And I think people really crave that found family feeling in their friends, which an apocalypse is kind of perfect for. You kind of would form that with your good neighbors, and then you would probably like fight against your evil neighbors that are trying to loot you. And it would all become very primal, and it would make things a lot clearer, and we would stop worrying about the silly things that we worry about day to day, and it would put our attention on the big things in life. Moving from post apocalypse to dystopia, I think another reason why we like dystopia, although I think this applies to post apocalypse too, it gives us a speculative lens to kind of look at the things happening in real life. It gives us a narrative and a way to make sense of things and to kind of take things down the slippery slope and to a logical conclusion and say, hey, this needs to stop, otherwise this might happen. We can say, this is like that time in 1984, or hey, the Met Gala alongside kind of footage of Palestine, this kind of is reminding me of the Hunger Games, and that's not a good thing, and maybe we should stop. And I think that's really useful to people. And we could look at like scientific studies and political theory and things like that and study history and stuff. And that's got a lot of value and impact as well. But sometimes reading a fictional narrative where you're really like in a specific character's head and you learn to care about these fictional characters, like in the Hunger Games, you're in Katniss's head, you care about Prim, you care about Peeta and Gale and Finnick, and you lose them along the way, and that has a lot of emotional impact, maybe more so even than like reading a news article that's written kind of with a lot of emotional distance, even though what's being reported is horrific. And I think fiction is almost designed to like boost our empathy more so than the news is, and news non-fiction articles, things like that. I think fiction, dystopian fiction and post-apocalyptic fiction, allows us to put our own emotions into a topic rather than just studying it from like a kind of academic stance. We're almost doing an emotional study of that topic. And I think that has a lot more power to change our behavior than just like facts. It's basically like taking the facts and presenting it in a way that makes it emotional too. And that's so valuable and so powerful. And the final reason why I think we're drawn to the idea, not just of apocalypse fiction, but like the idea of a real apocalypse, is, and this is going to sound like kind of silly, but I think it's FOMO. Like for me, it's the fear of missing out. Like I think a lot about death and not being here anymore, and like all of the fun stuff I'm going to miss out on. Like, and it sounds so silly, but I'm like, I'm going to miss all those memes. I'm going to miss all those new movies and books and albums, all of those opportunities and experiences. And like the idea of dying and leaving everyone behind, that's so sad. Like I'm going to miss out on so much. But in an apocalypse where like 99% of people are kind of cleared out, and advancement and things like new books, new albums, new movies, uh, that's not being made because the world is irrevocably changed. So there's like nothing good to miss out on, and everyone's kind of going at the same time. And you almost don't want to be the last 1% alive because that's kind of going to suck, and you're going to have to rebuild everything from scratch or maybe die a slow and painful death. So being like wiped out alongside everyone else, more or less, in an apocalypse, it's like, yeah, I guess I can go now. I can kind of go with more peace, if you know what I mean. Like, there's nothing good that I'm missing out on. So that's what I think about an apocalypse. I don't know if other people feel that way, but you can let me know if that sounds relatable or if I'm just like a bit unhinged and a bit crazy. And I'm like, if I'm going to go, I'm taking everyone down with me. Probably not the most healthy, like, thought, but that's what I think. I think dying in that kind of situation would be a lot easier emotionally to accept. This is presuming I had some knowledge of it before it happened and it wasn't just a poof kind of thing. Like if a meteorite was coming and we had 24 hours, I'd be like, well, at least we're all together. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And it almost like helps you relax because you don't need to then worry about, oh, what is going to get me? Am I going to get cancer? Is it going to be an asthma attack? Is it going to be a heart attack? Is it going to be old age and dementia? Is it going to be miserable in my old age? You don't need to worry about that anymore because it's just like in God's hands. It's taken out of your hands. Everyone's kind of in the same boat. And so there's something freeing about the idea of like dying in the apocalypse. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm not alone in thinking that. Let me know what you think. Do you like dystopian and post apocalyptic stories? If you've got any book recommendations along those kind of lines, let me know. I'd be super interested in reading them. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts. Am I crazy or do you agree with my assessment? Maybe I'll like do another video looking up scientific articles and research on this, if any exists, and see if I was kind of hitting the mark or if I am just on my own planet with that. Thank you so much for watching this weird ass video. Subscribe for more. I don't know if they're all going to be this weird, but if you like a weird topic, let me know. Suggest some more perhaps. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!